No connection.
This
Okay, we
So what are we doing?
Surprise. Give us a...
are studying. We are studying a Maimer. We are studying a Chassidic discourse from the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek was the third Rebbe of Lubavitch. There was the Alter Rebbe, there was his son, who's known as the Middle Rebbe, and then there was the Alter Rebbe's grandson, whose name was the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Menachem Mendel. He's called the Tzemach Tzedek because his famous halachic work that he wrote, his famous book of Responsa, where people would send him halachic questions and he would answer questions and judge matters of Jewish law, that sefer is called the Tzemach Tzedek. So he's named, like many people, like for example the Chafetz Chaim and other people are named after their most famous sefer. So the Tzemach Tzedek is also, we also call that Rebbe after his most famous sefer, which is called the Tzemach Tzedek. It's called the Tzemach Tzedek, by the way. One of the reasons it's called the Tzemach Tzedek is because Tzemach has the same gematria as Menachem, and Tzedek has the same gematria as Mendel. His name was Menachem Mendel. That's why it's called the Tzemach Tzedek.
Wow.
So he wrote very expansive and very what's the term? He wrote and spoke Chassidus that was very, very broad and very broad applications, and spoke to many things. He's most known, if you're to look at the way the Chassidus of the different Rebbeim differs one from the other, that Tzemach Tzedek's more common Maimarim, this is an exception in a way, we'll speak about it in a moment, but the Tzemach Tzedek's typical Maimarim were very famous for connecting the revealed aspects of Torah to Chassidus. So because he was a great Rav, he would often explain concepts in the revealed Torah, in Nigla, in Jewish law, and he would, and different things like that, and he would connect them to Chassidus. That's one thing in particular that he was famous for. This comes from a book that the Tzemach Tzedek wrote that he called Sefer Tameh HaMitzvos, which means a book that is the book of the reasons for mitzvahs. Okay? He called it the Sefer Tameh HaMitzvos. At a later publishing, a publisher decided it would be nice to call it Derech Mitzvosecha, which is actually how it became known more commonly. So even though he had a different name for it, Sefer Tameh HaMitzvos, what it's known as nowadays is Derech Mitzvosecha, which means the way of your mitzvahs. And what it is a book that explains different mitzvahs of the 613 mitzvahs according to Chassidus. It's not all of them. It's a decent chunk of them. I've never counted exactly how many. A decent number of them. A decent number of the 613 mitzvahs are explained according to Chassidus. It may interest you to know that this is considered, the Rebbe would often recommend when people would ask what they should learn if they're just starting to learn Chassidus. One of the things the Rebbe would recommend is to learn Derech Mitzvosecha, is to learn the Sefer from the Tzemach Tzedek. As compared to a lot of the Tzemach Tzedek's other Chassidus, this is actually very, very relatively easy and very clear and very straightforward. You may remember that and disagree later. It's not it's relatively simple and straightforward.
Relative is the right word, to say the least.
The Tzemach Tzedek wrote some of the Maimarim in Derech Mitzvosecha. The earliest Maimarim, the earliest writings in the Derech Mitzvosecha that the Tzemach Tzedek wrote were written when he was 9 or 10 years old. 9 or 10 years old is when the earliest Maimarim in the Derech Mitzvosecha are from. So the Tzemach Tzedek was what one may lightly call a precocious youth. Some of these Maimarim, the Maimarim aren't dated, so we don't know. I don't know if it's known exactly which parts are from when. I think some of them are from later, but some of the Maimarim in Derech Mitzvosecha were written when the Tzemach Tzedek was still a child. We are going to learn, and this will probably take us quite some time. We are going to learn one of the longest, if not the longest, I'm not 100% sure. No, it's not the longest. One of the longest mitzvahs in Derech Mitzvosecha, which is mitzvahs ha'amanas elikus, which means the mitzvah of believing in God. I chose this for a few reasons. Some of them are personal, mainly because I like this. I find this very engaging. I find it very interesting, and I think that it benefits everyone that comes to the class if it's something that I personally enjoy and I find very, very interesting. So that's one thing. Another thing is that it deals with very fundamental concepts. Faith in God and faith as it connects to reason and things like that is something that interests a lot of people very much. And the Tzemach Tzedek here really lays out clearly very, very foundational notions in the study of Chassidus. So what we have here is a work that is more abstract. It's more abstract than Kuntres Umayim. In other words, it's more dealing with the nature of God, the nature of godliness, and what are our responsibilities in terms of our faith in Hashem? What does it mean that there's a mitzvah to have faith in God? What does that mean? And in exploring that, we're going to touch on many different aspects and many different things in Chassidus. It has very broad applications, and in my very humble opinion, I think this is absolutely, this is foundational material. So quick word on the copies. I think I'm going to do the copies like this every week, unless something easier presents itself. So I've made the first page here is the original Hebrew. This is what it looks like in the original Sefer. If you just pick up Derech Mitzvosecha as it's published now, this is what you'll see. Then we have a translation, which was made a few years ago. If you just turn the page, the way the translation works is just a note, because it's done in a way that's confused Yeshiva Bachrim for years. The way the translation works is that you see the Hebrew text is in the upper left corner here, right? There's page 4 and page 5. You see this is 2 pages from the book, right? Mm-hmm. So you see the Hebrew text is in the upper left, and the English translation starts at the upper right and it wraps down. So you start at the upper right and you read down, and then you go under the Hebrew, and then you turn the page and start at the upper right again. In other words, the English translation goes in the opposite direction you would expect it to go. So don't be put off. You're not crazy. I'll put it online.
I'm saying is the Sefer available online?
I'll make it available online, God willing. I forgot to do that, but I will. Someone asked, did you switch to Derech Mitzvosecha? We finished Kuntres Umayim last week, Baruch Hashem, thank God. And now we are moving on to our next thing. We are learning mitzvahs Hamanas Alekus, the mitzvah of faith in God. And we may as well jump right in. Oh, before we jump in, no, that was incorrect, but we may not as well just jump right in. One last thing. The way the Maimarim and Derech Mitzvosecha are set up, and this is the same with whatever mitzvah you do, there are mitzvahs that are much more what you may consider simple. The Maimarim, the difficulty of the Maimarim doesn't follow what you expect. You think, oh, it's tzitzis, that's simple, and then you learn tzitzis, and you realize it's not so simple. The mitzvah of building the Aron may be easier to understand at Derech Mitzvosecha than tzitzis. I'm just saying. But the way they're set up in the Maimarim is that you have the quotes from the original Torah sources, and the Tzemach Tzedek quotes both Nigla and Kabbalah, because he's as the Rebbe of Chabad, obviously, and if you want to learn the thing in the full understanding of Torah, you have to have both the revealed aspects of Torah, the simple Torah law, and basically what the mitzvah is in the practical aspects of Torah, and the revealed aspects of Torah, and you also have to know what it means at a deeper level according to Kabbalah. And it's basically the first paragraph you'll see that Aleph in the Hebrew starts all the way down here near the bottom of the page. That's because everything before that is bringing all the sources that this Maimer is going to be based on. We're going to deal with lots of different great rabbis and lots of different Rishonim and different Rishonim. We're going to deal with the Zohar, different things that explain what this mitzvah is. And then at Aleph, the Tzemach Tzedek's explanation begins. So tonight, God willing, I'm hoping to get through the introductory material here, what the different sources say. Okay. So let's begin. I think I'm gonna just use the Hebrew unless I need to clarify something. Actually, you know what? Why don't I do it with the translation? So that's better. I'll read it from here so I can keep up. Okay. We have the first thing it says in parentheses is Yisrei. For some reason, this didn't make it into the translation. But if you look in the Hebrew, the first word is Yisrei. The mitzvah of having faith in God under the normal formulation of the mitzvahs comes from Parshas Yisrei. Parshas Yisrei, very famous for being the giving of the 10 Commandments, which is not unrelated to our work tonight. The first of the 10 Commandments, the first line of the Aseres HaDibros, of the 10 utterances that God said to the Jewish people on Mount Sinai, He said, I am Hashem, your God, who took you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery. Zu mitzvah aseh, ledo lahamin sheyesh eleka. This is a positive mitzvah. Positive mitzvah meaning it's something thou shalt do rather than something thou shalt not do. To know and to believe that there is a God. And this is what it says in Chinuch Chafhei. This is the Chafhei is 25. This is the 25th mitzvah in the listing in Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch is a famous book from the Rishonim, from medieval times. Its authorship is unknown, but it's viewed as authoritative by all Torah authorities. And what the Sefer HaChinuch does, it literally Sefer HaChinuch means the book of education. What the Sefer HaChinuch does is it goes through in order. I think it follows the same order of mitzvahs as the Rambam, if I'm not mistaken, and it goes through all the mitzvahs in the Torah, all the 613 mitzvahs. In order. So the 25th mitzvah in the Chinuch is based on this first verse of the Ten Commandments, and it says there is a positive mitzvah to know and to believe that there is a God. It's interesting that the title of our mimer is the mitzvah of believing in God, and he says to know and believe. And don't think that that's just nonchalant. That's not nonchalant at all. In fact, it's unbelievably contentious. And we're gonna talk about it. There's a difference between knowing God and believing in God, and in fact, it's a huge matter of controversy and discussion, which we're going to get into. The other thing we should note at this point is that which mitzvahs in the Torah are the 613 mitzvahs?
There's all kinds of opinions about that.
There's like at least 12 different opinions in the Rishonim over which mitzvahs in the Torah are actually the 613 mitzvahs. The Talmud says that there are 613 mitzvahs, but it doesn't list in the Talmud what the 613 mitzvahs are. And if you actually go to the Chumash and you read the 5 books of Moses and you read the different commandments of the Jewish people, you'll come to a number way, way more than 613. There's all sorts of things, right? There's things that seem only temporary. God told them to go there. God told them to do this. He told Moses to do this. He told Moses to do that. Right? If you take everything that seems like a command from God, there's way more than 613. And what happened later in history is that there were different people who were called Mernei HaMitzvahs, different great rabbis who are called the counters of the mitzvahs. And there are many svarim from many great rabbis just working out a system by which you come to 613 mitzvahs. So not only is there a list of the 613, right? This is what the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Rambam is, that's read here at Shachris every morning, right? There's the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Rambam, is the Rambam's book of what 613 mitzvahs are, his book of mitzvahs. But if you actually pick up the Sefer HaMitzvahs, you'll see that half of the book is the Rambam's introduction, in which he's explaining the rules that he uses to determine what is and what is not a mitzvah. And that's a whole half a book just on his system. You know, a mitzvah that was only for not one of the 613 mitzvahs, and there's many different rabbinic opinions on which ones exactly are the 613, and they're not just opinions. Each one of them has a different system by which they determine which one of them is or is not one of the 613. Saying everyone agrees that there are commandments, and these are all of these rabbis agree these are the commandments, and these commandments everyone follows, and we have a whole tradition in them. Yeah, which ones make the number? It's just a number, 613. Theoretically, the difference between a mitzvah and not a mitzvah. Theoretically, we're going to see that this isn't exactly the case, but theoretically, the difference between a mitzvah and a non-mitzvah is just whether it falls under the purview of the 613. What makes that case more complicated, what makes the situation more complicated, is that there are things which in the Torah, which there's not just a problem numerically or quantity-wise, including them in the 613, but quality-wise, there are certain things in the Torah that their nature seems contrary to being made into a mitzvah, which is part of what we're going to discuss. Okay, so all we've said so far is that the Chinuch, who I believe follows the Rambam's what the Rambam says the mitzvahs are, if I'm not mistaken, I think. This mimer is from the Chabad Chassidic. The Rambam says that the 25th mitzvah is to know and to believe that there's a God. In fact, more specifically, the Rambam says, if I'm not mistaken, I'm 99% sure, he says in the Sefer HaMitzvahs that the mitzvah is to believe, and he says in the Mishnah Torah, which is his elucidation of all the specific laws of the Torah, there he says it's to know. So the Rambam is of two minds on the matter, which is probably why I imagine the Sefer HaChinuch says to know and to believe. The mitzvah is to know and to believe.
Why does it take him so long to get to 25? Why isn't this number 1?
Because the count of the Chinuch, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it doesn't go according to the Rambam's order now that I think about it, but the count of, but in Sefer HaMitzvahs. The count of the Chinuch starts from the very beginning of the Torah, and there's more mitzvahs mentioned in the Torah. I imagine that's why it's in this order.
Yeah, the first mitzvah in the Torah is the calendar.
The first mitzvah in the Torah is
Yetziat Mitzrayim. There was the mitzvah. Purvu was before that.
Be fruitful and multiply. There's different counts. I believe he starts from the beginning of the text of the Torah. So pru revu is first. Be fruitful and multiply. Okay. So the Rambam, okay, so that's what the Chinuch says. The Chinuch says there's a mitzvah to believe and to know there is a God. The Rambam, Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Rambam in his book of mitzvahs, mitzvahs say Siman Aleph, right? This is what George was saying. The Rambam's first mitzvah, Bir Inyan Mitzvazu B'Lashon Zeh, explains this mitzvah in the following language. Mitzvah Rishon, the first commandment, is Hatzivui, the commandment, Asher Tzivanu Ba'amanas Alikos, that we were commanded to believe in God, have faith in God, have emunah in God, which is to know, which is to the belief that there is a cause. Ila and siba are two different words which both mean cause, but have more specific translations. They're often used as synonyms, but if you're being really precise, they're different. I forget the details. Hu pel l'chol nimtzayim, and he affects not in the, not like have an effect on. He acts. He creates all of the everything that exists, all beings. V'hu amru anochi havaya lekecha, and this is what the verse says: I'm Hashem, God. Ad kan l'shoneh. Until here is what the Rambam says. So the Rambam says, in agreement with the Chinuch, that there is a commandment, that we're commanded to believe in God, and the belief is that there is a first. There is a cause which creates everything that exists, and this is what the verse says: I am Hashem, your God. So in other words, the first of where is this mitzvah in the Torah? It's the first of the 10 commandments. V'haramban sham, Nachmanides, the Ramban with a nun, on this matter, Kesev writes, B'Shem Bahag, in the name of the Baal Halachas Gedolos, in the name of a different Rishon, oh no, I think the Baal Halachas Gedolos, yeah. Footnote 6, Halachas Gedolos, composed in there of the Geonim, was one of the Geonim, was the Baal Halachas Gedolos, another one of the people who counted the mitzvahs, okay? So this is complicated, this is a nested quote, don't get confused. We have what the Rambam and the Chinuch, and they basically agree. There's a mitzvah to believe in God, and this is based on the first of the 10 commandments. Now we have the Ramban, and he's going to quote the Bahag. The Bahag is the Baal Halachas Gedolos, the master of the great halachas, who himself was one of the people that counted the mitzvahs. Okay, the Ramban. I believe this is from the Ramban's commentary.
These are all Rishonim, right?
Sorry.
These are all Rishonim.
No, the Ramban was not
No,
Rishon.
the Bahag is older, but the Rambam and the Ramban and the Chinuch are all Rishonim. Yeah. The Ramban commenting brings the Bahag, and he says, and this is where all of the problems start. When I say the problems objectively, it's now going to be our problem. The Ramban writes, in the name of the Bahag, Shaloi mana b'taryag. The Bahag does not count faith in God as one of the 613 mitzvahs. V'anira midaitai shel Bahag, she'en minyan taryag mitzvahsav el gzeiresav yis'ala shegazer aleinu lases o menanei shaloi lases. And it seems, from his opinion, of the Bahag's way of understanding it, is that the count of 613 only includes those holy commandments where we are decreed to do or to not do something. Aval ha'emuna b'mitzvah yis'ala she'edia yis'alenu ba'eses u'b'mevsim u'b'gilei ha'shechina le'enenu hu ha'ikar v'asher shemimenu noldu ha'mitzvahs. But the faith in God's existence, God's exalted existence, which He demonstrated for us with signs and wonders, and with the revelation of His Shekhinah, of His presence, before our very eyes, referring obviously to the miracles before the Jewish people and the exodus from Egypt and the giving of the Torah, etc. This is not one of the 613 mitzvahs, but is rather the root from which the other mitzvahs are born. So again, the Rambam and the Chinuch say that faith in God is the first mitzvah. The Bahag disagrees. The Bahag says that the faith in God is not a mitzvah. Why? Because a mitzvah is something that you either do or don't do. Mitzvah, the literal translation of mitzvah, is a commandment. Faith in God, says the Bahag, is not something that God would demand of us, because He demonstrated His existence for us in the desert and with signs and wonders at Sinai. Therefore, this is not one of the 613 commandments because there's no real commandment part to it. This is something that God himself demonstrated before us. Rather, this is the root and the source from which all the mitzvahs are born. In other words, the first of the 10 commandments is itself not really a commandment at all. In fact, the whole idea that they're called commandments is not the correct translation of Aseres HaDibros, which means the 10 utterances, 10 sayings. Well, it's different. It's a different story. But at least the first of the 10 commandments is not a commandment at all. It's simply God saying, I am Hashem, I am the one who performed these miracles and wonders for you and took you from the land of Egypt. And that's not a mitzvah. That's not a commandment. It's a foundation, obviously, for everything that we do, for the mitzvahs, for the Jewish religion, for everything that we participate in, for our relationship with God. Obviously, God's existence is foundational, but it's not a mitzvah. It's not one of the 613. A mitzvah means thou shalt do this, or thou shalt not do this. And this is neither.
So even in later generations, it's not considered a mitzvah?
Correct. In the Bahag's opinion.
Yeah, but that's a problem because they lived at the time that for them, the
right,
existence of
because
God
there was
was
no
like
free will there,
certain.
no free choice.
Right.
It
Today,
It was way many generations after the
Sure.
revelation.
but still it was like 1,000 years before us.
You know what they're saying? 6,000 years. That
Sure.
we were closer to
I
the.
know they're gonna say it, but at least that I believe that this is the reason they say first you need to recognize, then you need to do. Because if you don't recognize, you don't.
No, fair enough. But I don't know if that's exactly the argument the Bahag's making. I don't know if what the Bahag is saying.
Compared to generations now,
That's a mitzvah.
Yeah.
Pardon?
different ballgame.
Part of the problem is that people do not believe in the existence of God.
I don't know. We're not dealing with
But
it.
it's like saying Bereshit was an utterance when the creation of the world happened.
It's not saying that belief in God is not foundational to
It's not a
Judaism.
mitzvah.
It's just saying that it's not one of the 613 commandments. By
Bahag is
the Baal Halachas Gedolos, who was a great rabbi in the times of the Ge'edim, the times immediately after the Talmud. This was when the generation of the Bahag was. So the Bahag actually precedes the Rambam and the Ramban, who is quoting him.
Happen to know his name?
What?
Happen to know his name?
Attributed to Rav Yehudai Gaon or Rav Shimon Kayara.
Is he like
Footnote
200
6.
in that area, the year 200 or?
I don't know exactly. I don't know the years. Yeah, after the times of the Talmud. I don't know the years exactly.
200, 300.
No, probably later. Probably 500, 600.
Like 900, wasn't he? And this is
Yeah, and Rashi's a Rishon. Yeah, in between.
Rashi is one.
The time of the destruction of the temple, when the Gregorian millennium started, was the time of Tanaim, was the time of the rabbis of the Mishnah. So after them came the rabbis of the Talmud, probably for quite some time, probably a couple hundred years. Yeah, maybe even a little later. Because usually we say the Middle Ages are the Rishonim, are the next generations. In between the age of the Talmud, which was written in Babylon, and the age of the Rishonim, of the medieval rabbis, in between was the time of the Ge'enim, where the Bahag is from.
כן, אז לא כתוב מתי כתבו אותם.
לא, זה הסדר.
כן.
No, not Babylon the first time. This is the remnant of the Jewish people in Babylon after the destruction of the second temple. Yeah, something like that. I don't know the years exactly. It's a bit embarrassing, but the temple was destroyed, I believe we say in 70, I believe.
70 AD.
The second one.
Yeah, the second one, that's what we're talking about. Okay. Lo yimnu b'cheshbenin. And the Bahag says that it's not included in the 613 mitzvahs. This doesn't mean it's not a large principle of Judaism. The Bahag is just saying that it's not one of the 613 mitzvahs. It's a root that the mitzvahs grow from. It itself is not a mitzvah. You want to know you know what? Something else that there are many opinions from the Talmud for that it's foundational to Judaism, but it's not a mitzvah. Something else like this. There's actually a couple of like this. Actually, there's a couple of things like this. Anyone want to venture something forward? Something that's considered a root or a foundation of our faith, but is not a mitzvah in the Torah. There's a couple
Does that
things.
do with the emunah?
No, not particularly. There's other things like this. For example, there's a disagreement over whether tefillah, of whether prayer is a mitzvah. That's a disagreement. It's one of the 613 Torah mitzvahs, but is nevertheless.
Instituted later, Because of
No. There's opinions which say that prayer.
Admiration was
There's opinions which say that prayer is a Torah mitzvah, but the nusach of the prayer, the words of the prayer were established. Everyone agrees that specific words of the prayer were established later. The question is the mitzvah to pray to God in any capacity, not the specific, not like the words that we have now in the Siddur, but to pray to God in any capacity, to ask God for your needs. Is that a Torah mitzvah or not? Clearly, the Torah is full of people that do it. The question is it a mitzvah? And the sources disagree. Another thing like that is tshuva, is repentance, is making up for mitzvahs that you don't do. Is another thing which there are opinions which say is not a mitzvah but is foundational to Judaism. So
Is it a mitzvah?
It depends who you ask.
Ask you.
You ask me. I'm not a. You can ask the Shulchan Aruch. The Rambam has hilchos.
Is it in
The
Shulchan Aruch?
Rambam has hilchos tshuva. It says for Yom Kippur maybe. I don't know if general tshuva is in the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not aware. Could be.
What does it say? V'agita bo yom v'layla.
Sorry.
V'agita.
V'agita?
Torah, learning Torah, limud Torah.
So this is not a part of the tefillah. It's something
No,
else. that's
something
related
else.
to-
Correct. V'nismach sham me'amechilta. Okay, the Bahag. I'm on page 6-7.
There's a debate whether tefillah is necessary or not.
No, not whether it's necessary, whether it's a mitzvah. Let's go
Right.
back. This is important.
Well,
This is important. When they say it's not a mitzvah, when the Bahag says that belief in God is not a mitzvah, does he mean it's less important than a mitzvah or more important than a mitzvah?
But mitzvah is something you are obliged to do. If it's not a mitzvah, you can.
We're
do it.
no, not exactly. Not exactly. It's funny because I actually got an argument with someone recently who said exactly that. He said faith in God's not a mitzvah according to some opinions, so you're not obliged to do it. So you realize that if you don't believe that God exists, that uproots a lot of things, right? You can't. How can you do the mitzvahs in their best way? It's true. You can do many of the mitzvahs without believing in God. That's true, actually, which is, in a sense, it's a gift. It's a gift that we were given in Judaism, that you can do mitzvahs and you without any basis in belief whatsoever. But nevertheless, half of the mitzvah does have to do with belief. It has to do with intention. It has to do with how you do the mitzvah, right? You can put on tefillin every day and not believe in God, and you still put on tefillin. But is it the best way to put on tefillin? Is that the way you're supposed to put on tefillin? It's not. So the Bahag, when he says, I think that when the Bahag says that it's not a mitzvah, it doesn't mean it's less important than a mitzvah. It's more important than a mitzvah. That's what the Bahag says. He says it's a root, right? He says ikar v'sheresh, ikar v'sheresh v'menu noldu ha-mitzvahs. It's the root from which all the mitzvahs are born. It's more a foundational principle than a mitzvah. The mitzvah is what you do, and then there's a foundational principle. Don't worry, we're going to be revisiting all these ideas a lot. This isn't our last time talking about it. And he based himself upon the statement of the Mechilta of the Midrash. This is what the Bahag says. Where does the Bahag come up with this distinction that there's things which are mitzvahs, but then there are things which are the root and source of mitzvahs but are not mitzvahs? He gets this from the Midrash. The Midrash says they received my kingship, just as they accepted my kingship, they accepted my decrees. So this is interesting. It's like when you have a king. The king, there's two things. Number one, you accept him as your king. You accept the king as someone whose decrees I will listen to. And then you actually listen to what he says and you do what he says. So there's two steps. There's accepting the king and accepting his decrees. So the Bahag says if that's the case, there's accepting the king and accepting his decrees. Faith in God is more like accepting the king than accepting his decrees.
Absolutely.
It's not a mitzvah. It's not one of the king's decrees. The Bahag has a very strict definition of decree. It says do this or don't do that. Is faith in God telling us do this or don't do that? No. It's a foundational part of accepting God, who then will tell you what to do. That's what the Bahag says.
Accepting or recognizing?
What it is there's the whole mimer. We'll talk about it. But you're right. There's a fundamental problem starting to learn the mimer because the word faith is not really defined at all. But faith, the way the Chinuch and the Rambam described it, it's faith that God exists. That's what they said. The belief, the Rambam said, the belief that there is someone that caused everything to exist. The belief in something that caused everything to exist. That's what the Rambam said. The Rambam says something similar in the beginning of Mishnah Torah, in the beginning of his book of Halachas, to believe that there's a first existence who brought all the other existences into being from the truth of his existence, something like that. That's what the Rambam says. Okay. Also, Kabbalah Samalchus in Yibifnei Atzor, v'amitzvah sanigzaris me'ita yisala
Where is it?
Inyan Acher. Yeah, I'm on in the translation. We're on page 7. Right, we just finished the quote from the Bahag. You can see it's in a different If we look, in the Hebrew we're on page 6, in the Hebrew we're on page 7, in the English we're on page 7, Hebrew we're on page 6. So we see, so the Bahag learns from the Medrash that there's accepting the kingship, and then there's accepting the mitzvahs. Does anyone have like a watch so I can keep an eye on the? There's lots of volunteers. I can't see it from here. I just need what minute we're on. There we go. Toda Rabba. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so that's the Bahag. That's the Bahag. The Bahag is clear. The Bahag's reasoning, generally speaking, is clear. There's things which are mitzvahs, and then there's things which come before mitzvahs, which are foundational principles, just like accepting the king before his commandment, before his decrees, and that's what the Bahag says the mitzvah of faith is. So the Bahag disagrees with the Rambam. Umikol makam das haramban ba'atzmai, but Nachmanides himself, the Ramban himself, right? He keharambam, he agrees with what the Rambam says. The Ramban agrees that faith is a mitzvah. As he finishes the code of the, as the Ramban writes after the code of the Bahag there, v'yesh lo panim. This is the opinion of the Bahag, and he has like what to stand on. There's foundation for what the Bahag says, that faith is not a mitzvah. But I will write further in the negative commandments the way it seems to me, the way it's clear to me. Siman Aleph, and in his thoughts on the negative commandments, the first one, Kasav lahedja Rambam, he writes clearly as the Rambam in agreement with the Rambam. So now we're on our fourth opinion. Who's keeping track? There's the Chinuch, faith is a mitzvah. There's the Rambam, faith is a mitzvah. There's the Bahag, no, faith is not a mitzvah. Faith is a preface to all mitzvahs. And now we have the Ramban who says faith is a mitzvah. And what does he say? We were commanded a first mitzvah in accepting the kingship of heaven. Meaning that we should believe that there is a God who created everything that exists, and he created them from nothing, into something,
Actually, the word is actually acting.
Yeah, the way you would say it in English is he affects them. Yeah. The word pearl means he acts. He acts all of the creations. Mm-hmm. In other words, he affects them. He creates them in his actions.
Right. As of now.
Right. He constantly creates them. Yeah, that's maybe an additional detail. Yeah. And he creates it from nothing into something, the something that he desires at all times. Sorry, you were saying?
This is the action recognition, because one does not go without the other. So
what does not go without what? Yeah.
Because if you don't believe that a God exists, there's nothing else.
Right.
Well, you can accept something you don't believe in.
So what are you saying? What are you saying exactly?
He said that first you need to believe in God's existence, then comes all the mitzvah.
No, but he's saying it's one of the mitzvahs. He says it counts as one of the 613.
Oh, I see.
He says it's a mitzvah. Everyone agrees that you have to believe in Hashem. That's not the question. The question is whether it's a mitzvah or not. Okay. V'hu Amar Yisparech, but Ramban continues. This is what. I think this may actually be the Tzemach Tzedek. This is what he says. Yisparech v'Yisrael anechi v'alekach shetzichem eretz Mitzrayim v'Ezel Vadim. Oh no, sorry. This is still the Ramban. I apologize. This is what God said. I am Lord your God who took you out from Egypt, from the house of slavery. She mitzvah be'emunah, and this is the commandment to believe. He says, as you have explained with proof from the words of their sages, that He has commanded us in this faith, which is the foundation of the Torah, and this is what until here are the words of the Ramban as they concern us. Okay, so that's four opinions. The Bahag says not a mitzvah. The Chinuch, the Rambam, and the Ramban say that it's a mitzvah. Okay. The Chen Kosev Meferesh B'Raya Mehemna. Sorry? The Tzemach Tzedek is not, I told you at the beginning, you may have missed the part where I explained at the beginning, the Tzemach Tzedek just brings the sources. He's not getting involved yet. We're getting involved in the next chapter, so to speak. The Chen Kosev Meferesh B'Raya Mehemna. So too it's written and clear in the Raya Mehemna. The Raya Mehemna is the section of the Zohar which deals with mitzvahs. The Raya Mehemna is the section of the Zohar which talks about and explains different mitzvahs. And it's clear there, in Parashas, the Zohar, we should say, the Zohar obviously being a a sefer of Kabbalah, more or less ancient, written by the Rashbi, although there's some controversy over how early it was written, how late it was written. It's a whole thing. You can Google it and take a side. It's a whole thing. The authorship of the Zohar. The vast majority of Torah authorities have accepted the Zohar as a work that was passed down from Rav Shimon that was written by Rav Shimon Bar Yochai in the times of the Mishnah. So the Zohar is actually the oldest source that we have brought so far, and it's a Kabbalistic source, obviously, not a part of the revealed Torah. And the Rabbi Menachem Parshas Ve'era writes. Daf Chav Hei Amud Aleph on page 25, side 1. V'zel Shreinei, it says there, V'yadaitim ki ani avai elekechem, you should know that I am Hashem, your God. We get to test my Aramaic, which I always enjoy. Pekuda da kadma. There is a first mitzvah. The chol pekudin. The first of all mitzvahs. Lamanda, to know. The ishlita ilah, that there is a supernal rulership. The iu riboin alma, who is the master of the world. Ubara almin kulu, and created all of the worlds. Shmaya v'ara, heaven and earth. The kol chileon, and all of their hosts, everyone, all the beings within them. V'da ihu bichlala. This is the command in the general sense. Yeah, I knew the translation would come in handy. It's the Aramaic. Kevan de yadal pekuda da b'erech klal kedein elif lein b'erech prat. And just as there is a general mitzvah, so too there is a specific mitzvah. Ki avayu elikim da b'erech prat kama razin v'stidin ispe ad chalashen, and to know that there is a God that Havai is Elikim in the particular way. This contains many secrets and mysteries, and this is what until here is what the Zohar says. Mavur midvarav, and so what we learn from this is the Tzemach Tzedek. What we learn from the Zohar, shepekuda kadma b'arech klal he mitzvazu da'amanas alikos, that the first mitzvah in a general sense is the belief in God. Shemana harambam mipsuke anechi, that this same mitzvah that the Rambam bases on the pasuk of anechi and the first of the Ten Commandments. Mashakasu b'erech prati mitzvahs achdus Hashem, and afterwards what he writes about the specific way is not the faith in the existence of God, but rather achdus Hashem, rather the unity of God, which is a whole other thing. God willing, when we finish one day mitzvahs hamanas alikos, the mitzvah of faith in God, we're going to do the next mitzvah in Derech Mitzvosecha, which is achdus Hashem, the unity of God, which is a whole other topic. So you have the existence of God and the unity of God. And Tzemach Tzedek is saying this is what the Zohar calls the first mitzvah generally and the first mitzvah specifically. In other words, the Zohar sort of seems to say it's two parts almost of one mitzvah. Shemana Rambam Sham, and this is what the Rambam counts as a mitzvah. Siman Beis bepasuk Shema Yisrael Havai Elokeinu Havai Echad. What the Rambam learns from the verse Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, from the Shema he learns unity of Hashem. V'ken kasav achinuch taf yud zayin. So too the chinuch says in mitzvah 417. Okay, so the Zohar also agrees that faith in God is a mitzvah. The Zohar says the same thing. The Kenhu leheja ba'agdama Zohar. So too it is clearly in the preface to the Zohar of Bereshis, Daf Yud Beis, page 12, Amud Aleph, on the first page, Pekuda Tzli Saw, Pekuda Revi'ah, that there is a third mitzvah and a fourth mitzvah. Shem Beis mitzvahs elu hamanas alikus v'hayichud yuyun sham. There is a third mitzvah, a fourth mitzvah. These two mitzvahs, the faith in God and the unity of God. Okay, so that's as far as I wanted to go now. So basically, what we have here is we have all the sources. So what's interesting? Let's summarize. There's first of all, we noted, and this is going to be important later, that there's believing in God and there's knowing in God. And the Rambam uses both terms under the same mitzvah, under the same heading, from the same verse, in two different svarim, and the Chinuch uses both of them. Meaning to say, there seems to be some sort of leeway or ambiguity, or there's believing and then there's knowing, and you'd think that believing and knowing maybe in some sense are opposites one from the other, but they're used here together, which is interesting. That's going to come up again. Then we have all of our rabbinical opinions. We have the Chinuch. The Chinuch says that faith in God is a mitzvah. You have the Rambam. The Rambam says faith in God is a mitzvah. You have the Bahag, who the Ramban brings, the Bahag says not a mitzvah. He says foundational to all the mitzvahs, but it itself is not a mitzvah. We have the Ramban, who says it is a mitzvah, and we have the Zohar in two different places, in both Rabbi Mehemna and the Preface to Bereshis, which says that it is a mitzvah. So the vast majority of opinions that Tzemach Tzedek brings say that Hamanas Elokus is a mitzvah. Right? We are going to the way the Maimer is going to continue is we're going to launch into a whole discussion over what's this really about, because if you'll note what it says in the Bahag, what the Bahag said that it's not a question of it's interesting. The Bahag basically gives two reasons or two explanations why this isn't a mitzvah. The first one is technical. In other words, the first one is the Bahag simply says that there's the king, and then there's what the king commands. There's a mitzvah is do this or don't do that, and faith in God is not one of those things. It's interesting.
But in general, how could he contradict what's written in the Zohar?
Sorry?
How could he say that what's written in the Zohar is not right?
Torah has 70 faces, 1,000 faces.
Right. Many times the
different ways of
Nigla and the
looking at
Nistar
it.
contradict each other. Many times.
Appear to contradict each other. But I don't know why you have to. I don't know why you.
Contradictions, but they refer to different situations.
No, but I don't know why you have to. I don't even know why you have to go so far. We have a disagreement in Nigla. The question is, how can the Rambam disagree with the Bahag? Is an even stronger question. So, because the Zohar, you could argue, as many people do, wasn't revealed. So the vast majority of even great rabbis didn't know the Zohar, didn't have access to the Zohar in the times of the Rambam and the Ramban. So they shouldn't be held responsible for that. But what about the Bahag? They disagree with the Bahag's reasoning, right? So obviously, what we try and do is we try and find an explanation. We either say that this is we do what the Talmud does, right? The Talmud either says that resolves the contradiction by saying they're talking about different things or in different cases, or there's some sort of it's our misunderstanding, right? They were really agreeing. When we read it, we're making the mistakes somehow, thinking they're talking about the same thing, or based on the same verse, or whatever the contradiction may be. Or you do what the Gemara does, and you try and understand what is the fundamental root underlying issue of their disagreement, which is actually what the Tzemach Tzedek is going to look into. Most of the mitzvahs do not, let me put it this way, most of the mitzvahs in Derech Mitzvosecha do not start with a debate over whether it is or is not a mitzvah. There's already like a big warning for this is a weird thing, as some of you have clearly feeling. This is a very odd thing, mitzvahs tzitzis. I don't think there's no sources that Tzemach Tzedek brings about tzitzis that are talking about tzitzis is a mitzvah, tzitzis isn't a mitzvah. Faith in God, all of us is already, even before we get to the Chassidic explanation, if we see faith in God is already complicated. But as I was saying, one reason the Bahag says that this isn't a mitzvah is technical, right? He says the mitzvah is what you do. A mitzvah is what you do or you don't do. Mitzvah means a command in a very pragmatic sense, right? Not a general follow me in life or be my person or something very general like that. The Bahag is very pragmatic in a sense, right? A mitzvah means, a commandment means, thou shalt do X, Y, Z with a very specific commandment or order, or thou shalt not do X, Y, Z with something to avoid. So it's faith in God as a concept. It's a very lofty thing, but it can't be a mitzvah, according to the Bahag. That's the pragmatic reason. Then the Bahag says at the end of his explanation, as brought in the Ramban, that it's not just that, but this is a root of the mitzvahs from which the mitzvahs are born, which is also very interesting. So even though the Bahag feels fine to say that emunah is not a mitzvah, he comes back and he says, really it's more than a mitzvah. He says it's qualitatively there's a difference. There's a difference between faith and there's a difference between the king and the king's commandments. And this is something that we're going to zoom in on a lot in our Chassidic understanding of emunah, and our Chassidic understanding of what it means to have faith in God. So the Bahag's the second reason of the Bahag, there's a qualitative difference here. And maybe if we can understand that qualitative difference, we can resolve some of this contradiction, some of this tension between the Bahag and the people that disagree with him. Because if we understand, now that we understand that there may be two different aspects of faith, there may be something like a more practical aspect and something which is more rather a foundation or a foundational idea in the mitzvahs, maybe we can understand the difference between all these opinions. Nevertheless, the vast majority of opinions say that faith is a mitzvah. The opinions brought so far, and that includes the Ramban and the Zohar. Let's read their summary inside here. Synopsis: I should point out that the summaries, when we were learning Kuntres Umayim, the summaries were written by a Rebbe. I'm not 100% sure. They're either written by the Rebbe Rashab or the Friedrich Rebbe, the son of the Rebbe Rashab. It was the sixth Rebbe of Lubavitch. He liked to write summaries, and I believe the summaries on his father's Maimarim come from him, if I'm not mistaken. Here, the synopses are done by the translator, the modern translator of this work from about 10 years ago. So you just shouldn't mistake these synopses for those synopses. The Tzemach Tzedek raises a question: is faith in God considered a mitzvah? Rambam and the Zohar are considered as one, while the author of Halachas Gedolos does not. Raya Mehemna and Rambam make a distinction between faith in God and belief in His oneness, and count the latter as a separate commandment. That's the synopsis, which is, I forgot to mention that in what I was saying before, that we did touch on the idea that there's a difference between faith in God and the unity of God, the oneness of God, which is something that we're going to discuss, God willing, next week when we begin the Tzemach Tzedek analysis. So this week was kind of almost a preface. We didn't really get to the Chassidus here, but next week we're going to start really, God willing, digging into this. And it's very, I hope this has piqued your curiosity, because it's very, very, I find it very, very interesting. So God willing, this seems
like a really good topic. So is the Tzemach Tzedek more of a compiler or an editor compared to the Rebbe Rashab, because he was more directive, and here we're discussing all kinds of different opinions?
No, this is not. This preface is just the way that Derech Mitzvosecha is written, the book on the mitzvahs. Because of the style of this book, which is written as an explanation of the reasons for mitzvahs, which, by the way, is a rabbinic genre going back all the way to the beginning. Books explaining the meaning of the mitzvahs is very old. In a sense, the Sefer HaChinuch is also a book explaining the meaning of the mitzvahs, right?
This seems like more Gemara-esque.
No, but it's just this. It's just the beginning part. It's just the Tzemach Tzedek bringing his.
Read that
What is that,
first
10 years old?
mitzvah, and sprouts all the other
A child.
mitzvahs in the sense, it's not like Hasidic. Obviously, a genius.
It's not just a Hasidic concept. In fact, where the Talmud says that there are 613 mitzvahs, it says that different people came along and said there were fewer. Different people came along and said there were fewer numbers. So one opinion said there are 613, and then someone came, if I'm not mistaken, I think Habakkuk or Malachi. Oh gosh, this is so embarrassing. One of the Nevi'im, one of the prophets came, and the Gemara says they said all the mitzvahs are one mitzvah. And it says Tzaddik b'emunaseh yichya. A tzaddik lives on his faith. The Talmud says this is the one. According to one opinion, this is the one mitzvah of the Torah, that a tzaddik lives on his faith. As we're going to discuss, this is a. I also think, in addition to just enjoying this topic, I think it's very interesting because the word faith in the Hasidic understanding is very different than how it's typically used in the modern understanding, and the terrible misunderstandings lead to just mass confusion. You have Jews saying things like if you could know God, that would ruin faith. That's why you can't know God. That's why you can't know things, because